this is Freddy with Freddy Can Fly, and in today's video we are going to continue on with the Spirit 2 setup guide for the fly barless system. Our last segment we went over things like the binding procedure, and so now you should be able to go ahead and successfully install into your model. First thing we want to do here, let's do a little bit of benchtop first before we get into it. You will notice that I've removed, hopefully you can see that, I've removed the main rotor, and if you've got a mixing or washout base or anything like that, to where we've got just Swash. That way we can do our leveling and everything. This video we're going to be walking through the setup wizard process, and we're going to focus mainly on getting the Swash, the CCPM, and all that correct. Then we can reinstall the main rotor and do the pitches and center everything out, and then we should be ready to fly from there, okay? So what I want you guys to do first is go ahead and make sure in our previous segments that you've got all the software and everything installed. That way that's ready to go. And then get your patch cable installed into the unit. Again, it's going to go into the SYS or system port. Pay close attention to the orientation of the pin as well. And then this will just plug into a USB port on your laptop or PC. It's a pretty long cable, guys, so you should have no issues with it reaching. Also, another note too, and I'll explain this more as we go through the process, but I'm gonna disable my throttle. So I'm gonna make sure that my throttle curves for normal, idle 1 and idle 2 are all set to 0 flat. That way, in case I bump my idle up or something, the machine can't spool up on me. I highly recommend you do this, or as an alternative precaution, you can just unplug your motor to ESC wires, okay? So now that that's all done, let's go ahead, and we're going to want to power up the machine first. Otherwise, the software won't recognize anything and it puts you into demo mode. Alright, so I'm going to boot up my radio, make sure everything's neutral, and then I'm going to go ahead and provide power to the machine. Right there. Let it do its little song and dance here. Now again, if you were bound correctly, as in the previous segments, you should have no issues with getting your solid satellite. And that's for Spectrum, of course. If you're using something else, again, Futaba or whatnot, you might have a bit of a different result, okay? So now everything's powered up. I know you can't see it, but we've got a blue, I think you can kind of see if I put my finger there, we've got a blue status LED. Means everything booted up correctly. So jump with me over here real quick to the computer. And what we're going to want to do is we'll pull open the Spirit settings software. Okay? And now, like we left off with last time, when you open this up, it's going to show us connected. It's going to show us our current version, serial number, and then we kind of went through some of these tabs. Now, what we're going to do in this case is let's ignore all the tabs up top, and we're going to do what's known as the setup wizard. Guys, this system is so easy to set up, but there are some tricks and some gimmicks you're going to want to know, because I did struggle a little bit until I really delved deeper and figured out, what does what. So let's begin the process here. First thing we're going to do is click the Setup Wizard. Now take in mind, before you start this process, you could have your servos unplugged, because it is going to have you set up the frequencies and the pulses, and everything as well, but I did mine beforehand because I kind of jumped the gun, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so let's click on Setup Wizard. Boom. Gives you a little bit of an introduction here. It does give you a direct link to the manual. That's easier than going to the website. Feel free to do so, and a couple other things, but again, it's going to walk us through most of this. So we'll just go ahead and hit Next. And here we go. Step 1 of 10, you guys. It only takes 10 steps to make this thing ready to fly. We'll call the 11th step the fine-tuning. So in my case, here is the receiver options that they offer. I'm going to be using the Spectrum DSM2 or DSMX satellite option. Please choose yours accordingly. Now this part kind of played with me a little bit because it's cool. Whatever receiver type you select, it's then going to give you the correct corresponding wiring diagram. So if I were to choose the S-Bus, it's going to give me a different setup. If I were to choose the PWM, it gives me a different setup. So this is really cool. But we kind of went over this earlier too. Make sure everything's plugged in appropriately. Now this here is kind of cool. Okay, so it's going to give you a couple of options here for setting up. Now, the mounting orientation is crucial. You'll notice that this has a little arrow that's referring to pointing towards the nose. So the way mine's mounted is I've got the, we'll say the LED facing the nose and the pins facing the tail. You'll notice though, if I change any of those, it also changes the picture on the right. Okay, so that makes it basically, you know, dummy proof. You can choose your correct mounting orientation. Next is your swash plate, your cyclic and collective pitch mixing. Mine's 120 degrees, and it does give you, again, a picture of the swash. Really cool. Select yours appropriately. Now, in my case, I'm using the Tron 5.5, which this doesn't have a model preset for, but look at this big old list of presets you guys can choose from. Gowie, they've even got TDR on here, Mikados. So if yours happens to be on here, if you're a Goblin guy or whatever, try using your preset. It's pretty cool because it'll change most of this stuff in the software for you automatically, and then you just kind of go through the wizard and make sure everything is sound. But in my case, I'm going default, so I got to kind of go from scratch. Take into consideration here my CCP. I'm being at 120. I want mine to be with my swash plate towards the back, of course. So this should be channel 1, left servo, channel 2, back servo, channel 3, right servo. Make sure that that's correct as well, or whichever swash plate you choose, make sure that corresponds to the channel ports. And I believe we kind of talked about that a little bit as well. Okay, pretty easy. Let's go next. Now this menu we've kind of already seen, but we'll revisit it. Make sure you set up your pulses and your frequencies for your servos. They do leave a link right here for a servo list table. I use the reference of the Beast X servo list online. I think they all work great. So, or you can just look up your individual servo and look at the specs. But make sure these are set. And then we can go ahead and continue on. It gives us another really quick rundown of our servo mapping and wiring. But okay, pretty easy so far, guys. So far we haven't even broken a sweat. Go next. Now this part kind of confused me, because now it shows that our status is no longer connected. What this wants you to do is it wants you to, at this point nothing has been saved into the unit. So this is the part where we're going to kind of be able to link up and save, to my understanding. So it shows me not connected, but I've already bound my system. So I was kind of scratching my head for a minute. And I was like, okay, well let's just hit connect, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click connect. And now it tells me that there's a reconnection needed. And I'm like, well, what the heck? So basically it's telling me it wants me to power down, rebind, and then power back up. But if you have already successfully bound your model, you don't need to. You can literally just click connect again, and boom, now we're connected. I don't know why it doesn't give you the option up here, but basically just double click, you'll be connected if you're already pre-bound. If not, now's a good time to go through the binding process, of course. So we're all done there. Again, guys, we're already on step 5 out of 10. We'll click next. Now here's where things are about to get interesting. Okay, we're done with the mapping and the software stuff for now. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to our transmitter. This is going to be the calibration portion, if you will. They label it the diagnostics panel, step 5 of 10. Now it does give you some pretty important information here. I want you to pay the most amount of attention to this bad boy right here, this bottom line. The movement of the channels must be correct. If they are not, you can use the reverse function in the transmitter to get the correct direction channel movements, okay? Now what this means is, let's take a look at the rudder right here. You'll notice it says 0%, so per my binding and calculations of the fly barless system, it centers everything automatically. So that should be 0. If it's got a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, you might want to try a rebind, or you can visit the feature in your radio, if it has it, that lets you change the center pulse positions. But I would just maybe try a rebind. But getting back to it, the way this is set up here is, you'll notice you've got that little blue toggle on there, right? If I move my rudder stick to the left, don't worry about orientation of your actual mechanical slider right now. We don't care. This is strictly radio. That slider should move left. And if I move it right, it should move right. So forth and so on, right? My pitch, if I move my pitch up, blue toggle should move up. If I move my pitch down, blue toggle down. Check your elevator, up, down, and aileron, left, right. Don't mind the gyro for now. It's saying 55% because I've got my heading lock mode set to 55%. If this does have a value, that would mean that you've already enabled the gyro menu. If it doesn't have a value, feel free to enable your gyro menu. And the default setting, it wants you at 50% for your test flight. I bumped mine up 5% just to be safe because I know usually the default settings are a little low. And then you'll also notice something strange over here, right? My throttle isn't moving. That is because right now I have a 0% on my throttle curve. That way the model won't spool up on me. This should calibrate automatically, right? I'm at a 0 on my curve. If I put 100%, I should be able to throttle up to 100%. And we'll double check that, later once we get into throttle calibration and stuff. But this one you don't have to worry about. If you want to unplug your motor wires, you can, and then set a linear curve, and you should see a 0 to 100 readout on there. Now that we know the directions are correct, again, this has nothing to do with the movement of your servos. Pay attention only to the blue markers. Left should be left, right should be right, up should be up, down should be down, etc. Okay? Now the next thing is that we pay attention to this little top section, where it wants us to, okay, so let's look at the elevator. Elevator's at 0% and I'm in center. If I move full elevator forward, it should get 100%. If I move full elevator backwards, we should be at 100%. If for any reason you are not and your calculations here are off, maybe you're at 99, 102, whatever the case is, what it wants you to do is go into your servo adjustment endpoint menu, or travel adjust if you will, which on my Spectrum DX7, let's see if I can show you guys here. Okay, I'm in the travel adjust menu for my servos. Now, all you'll have to do is, let's say, I noticed my rudder was actually slightly off. Sometimes when you connect in, they might be off by 1% or so. I usually don't let that bother me too much. But it's more or less going to be, you'll notice it says that you want to try to get them to plus 100 and minus 100 exactly, or at least as close as possible. So my rudder, if I move it all the way left, I'm noticing that I'm at a 101. So if I go into my rudder, and you notice if I start adjusting it, oop, now I'm at 99. Now I'm at 97, 96. Okay, so I want to try to get this at 100, but you'll notice mine has that gap, right? It goes from 101, if I make one click, gives me a 99. It's like, what the heck, right? So again, it might just be ever so slightly off, but I'm probably going to pick the one that gets me close to 100%. So on my right stick, it's 99 on my travel adjustment, and on my left stick, oh, see that? Now it's at 99. So, you guys, it can be a little finicky at times, but that little 1% I usually don't stress about too much. Because I got 100 on the left and 100 on the right. Okay, so I'm going to leave that basically as is. Again, it's just a little bit of a delay in readout and things like that. I mean, I really don't feel the need to bump it. Just kind of play with it a little bit. It's a little time consuming, guys, but just spend the time you need to make sure everything is right. So you'll see how it's offset by about 1%. It wasn't when we powered up the system, but now it's saying it is, and that's probably what's doing it. So I'm going to try to keep mine just right there to where I'm comfortable. That gives me 100 on left and 99 on right. Not a big deal, right? Pitch, same thing. You know, it's got 99, but it's got 100 at full. So if I really feel as though that needs to be adjusted, you know, I can go in, and it's going to give me that same variable. So I'm going to leave it at, well, it gets me at 100. And then at full, I'm actually at 98. So that one's pretty close. Let's bump it a little bit. Yeah, we'll go right there. Okay, so anyways, guys, I don't want to spend way too much time on this. I think you guys get the point. Elevator looks good. Aileron looks great. So everything looks to be pretty spot on. I bet if I recycle power, it should all be dead on. But get it as close as humanly possible and try to leave your travel adjustment ranges as close to 100, plus 100, minus 100 as possible. And make sure those toggles are moving in the correct direction. Okay, that's one of the most important parts. Once you have all this done, let's go ahead and move on to the next step. And this is where it got a little tricky for me, guys. Okay, so after this menu here, you no longer are changing anything in the radio. The rest will be done within the programming parameters of the software, okay? Do not use subtrims or anything like that in the radio. Don't use anything else besides just your travel adjustments and servo reversing features to get this correct, okay? Now, let's go ahead and move on. And this is an important menu here. So what I want you to do real quick is don't check anything, leave it all as is. I'm going to uncheck my current settings, okay? So you'll notice I've got these check marks, okay? Right here is where we're going to be able to set up the mechanical mixing and the CCPM. So jump over to the heli with me real fast. And let's take a look, okay? So theoretically, if I hadn't checked any of those boxes, here's the movements that I have right now. I'm going to move my collective, which means all three servos should mix up and down, or down and up, whatever the case is. But let's just move it. And that is not the case at all. I'm actually getting what you could call an elevator movement, so to speak. So that's my collective there. My elevator is acting more like a collective movement. And my aileron is actually working the way it's supposed to. Okay, so now we need to figure out, again, if you remember, we have channels 1, 2, and 3 on the Swashplate. We need to figure out the right mixing by checking or unchecking those three boxes we have until you get the right movements, okay? So, what I'm going to try to do here is, let's see if we can maybe do more of like a picture-in-picture screen real fast. That way you can see over here on the computer screen, okay, if I check number 1, which will be channel 1 that I'm reversing, and we come back over to here, let's move our collective. Okay, now we're getting a tilt this way instead, so we're not quite there yet. Check our other movements. Yeah, that one's totally off. Now if I uncheck it and just try checking number 2, oh, look at that. My collective now works as it's supposed to. It's reversed in travel, but all three are mixing. Elevator works, and now my aileron is reversed, but it's mixing correctly. So we're almost where we need to be. Let's try just checking number 3. And I get basically the same result, but opposite. So now I'm kind of at a loss, and I'm a little confused on what to do. So now we can try some combinations. Maybe we go 3 and 2. Nope, that doesn't work. And suddenly we got channel 1 and channel 3. Hot damn, that's the right configuration for my machine and my layout of servo mapping. So collective up, collective down, elevator forward, elevator back, and we've got aileron to the right, aileron to the left. That's my configuration, guys, that we need. One thing to notate here is if your collective is correct in the mixing, but you know, up is moving it down and down is moving it up. If we jump over to the computer screen here, you will notice right here, collective direction, you can simply check that and it will reverse travel. So if you've got these all selected and everything is mixing appropriately, but the collective is wrong as far as direction, just check this little box, boom, all problems are solved. And then of course you'll want to check the channel 4 is for the rudder. So if your rudder is not moving in the right orientation, just simply check that, and that's going to reverse it. Of course, if the tail was pointing towards your midsection, the best way I do it is left rudder stick, mechanical slider should move right. Right rudder stick, mechanical slider should move left. If that's not the case, go ahead and check this. Now, if you've got a different machine, though, where your tail prop is on the left of the hub, or any other difference in mechanics, take in mind that could vary, but in most cases that should be solid information, okay? So now that we've got everything correct and it's moving in the right direction, let's go ahead and hit next. Okay, we're on 7 out of 10, guys. We're doing really good. Now, this menu is going to be really important as well. So when you first enter into this, usually the menu is disabled like this. What you're going to want to do is I click on Subtrim / tuning. What this will do is it's going to activate the toggles, but it's going to also center everything for you automatically. So if you move your collective, you'll notice that the Swashplate doesn't move at all, okay? So now is the time to jump over and we'll do the Swashplate leveling. Very, very easy, very simple. Again, guys, you've got your pitch toggle. You'll move it up or down. Aileron, elevator, rudder. I'm going to leave it be. I'm not going to mess with my rudder at all. I usually am able to center this by servo and the linkage. And I've noticed that this usually causes like drifting and stuff on a lot of different things. So I'm just going to leave that center for now. Let's jump over to the helicopter here real quick. Okay, and you'll notice again that everything's centered out. Now, I'm going to put my Swashplate leveling tool on. And guys, I kid you not, you can level a Swashplate in just a couple of seconds if you use the method that I've came up with. Other people may call it different things, and I'm sure a lot of people do it somewhat the same way. But I use what I call a master servo, or a key servo, to 90 out my system. And the way that's going to work is, first I'm going to take my 3 link rods, and I'm going to make sure that they are all set to the exact same length. Now, take in mind this may not be the correct length to get the Swashplate in the center of travel, but I don't care. We can adjust that later. What we want is 90 degrees on our servos first. That's our foundation of the system. So let's say our servo or our helicopter manual wants, you know, from link rod to link rod, it wants 15 millimeter. Set all 3 link rods to exactly 15 millimeters, or whatever you want to set them to. As long as these are right, you can use a master servo to key off and get all your servos at 90. So here's how we're going to do it. Linkages are all set. Same length on all of them. I'm going to then, let's say I didn't have my servo horns on at this point, I would then put my servo arms on, and I'm going to try to position each servo arm as close to 90 degrees as mechanically possible, which means the servo arm is only going to let me bite down at certain spots. Some of them, boom, are dead 90, some are slightly off. You might find one servo fits on perfect, the other 2 are off. I mean, there's always just different variables, you guys. But the key part here is going to be making sure that you find one servo that is basically going to be your master servo. So in my case, I picked this guy here, which is my channel 3, my right servo. So when you look at your settings, in the Subtrim settings here, channel 3 is my aileron. And I'll bring it up here on screen real quick to show you. You'll notice that my aileron has 0 trims, right? I was lucky enough that the servo arm on this one fit at a dead 90, or at least as close as the human eye could see. So I left that one as is, and I made it my master servo. You'll notice these ones, they have quite a value to them. My elevator was way off, but I couldn't get it any closer. And my pitch was just a little off, but I couldn't get it any closer without adding trims, okay? So, jump back over here. We've got this one at a dead 90. Now, in theory, if my link rod arms are all exactly the same length, all I need to do, so what I usually will do is I'll drop the value of these other 2 servos down. That way my Swashplate is sitting kind of crooked, because my master servo is at 90 degrees and my link arm, let's just say, was at that 15 millimeters. That's the setup I want to match. So with these servos, I'll trim them down and drop them below this one. That way when I put my swash tool on, you'll notice that this one touches, but these 2 do not, right? The Swashplate, the little pins on the swash are going to be low. All you got to do, guys, is take it 1 servo at a time. Start with the elevator servo. Just slowly bring up that toggle, bring up that value, until it touches the swash leveling tool. What I usually do is I'll move it until it starts to lift up, and then I'll drop it back down, and then now these two are touching, and this one is not, right? So then you go to this one, same thing, bring it all the way up until it lifts up the other two, drop it back down till all three are level, and all three are touching. I rotate and check all sides of the swash tool. You now should have a perfectly level swash, and if you look at your servos, all three of your servos should be at the exact same plane. If one of them is off, they're all off, right? If your master servo was slightly off of 90, your other two servos are slightly off of 90. But the point is, they now travel in sync with each other, and that is the easiest way to level a swash. You can do it in 5 seconds. I mean, I promise it's, well, maybe more like 2 to 3 minutes, we'll say, but it's bulletproof. I do it on every machine with every system, and it never fails, okay? So, go ahead and get your swash plate level, get your trimming and everything done. Once you're completed with that, we can then move on to the next step. Let's jump back over to the computer here. Okay, everything's done. Boom, let's hit next. Now take in mind we don't have the main rotor on, so we don't know if we're at 0 degrees of pitch or this or that yet. So some of these steps we're going to come back to. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. So here we go, this one here. It wants us to do similar to the micro B steps. It wants us at a 6 degree on the cyclic with the blades running down the length. When we get to this point, we'll go ahead and put our pitch gauge on and just basically move up or down until we get our 6 degrees. But we're focusing on the swash for now, or the swash plate for now. Let's move on. Now this one, okay, this one is kind of a big ins for me too. So let's start right here with pitch range, okay? This is obviously how we're going to set our maximum positive and negative, right? Plus 12, minus 12, so forth and so on. To keep things safe, I usually keep this number relatively low, but before I install my main rotor, I want to make sure I'm getting a perfectly level travel. This is probably one of the most important things you can possibly do, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise this up quite a bit, probably more pitch than I'd ever have, but I'm going to check to make sure that my servos are indeed traveling in sync, okay? So I'm not going to get too crazy. I don't want any servo binding or anything, so jump back over to the machine with me here real fast, and let's just do it like this, okay? Let's go ahead and raise our collective up, and then let's go ahead and move the toggle up to where we think, you know, I'm used to seeing this on heli, so I'm thinking about right here, so it's probably going to put me about 13 to 14 degrees of collective. And let's move them down. And you'll notice now we've got a lot more throw on that swash, right? A lot more. As a matter of fact, we can even, let's take it, I'm going to take it up to 140. Let's go 140. That is a crazy amount of pitch, right? We'd be slapping the air, not cutting it at that point. But what I'm going to do is let's start in our center position. So I've got my stick at middle, 50 in, 50 out. Let's slide that tool back on, guys. Now, very carefully watch. Now, as this travels up and down, make sure that all three connection points on the swash tool stay connected. Now, if they slightly, I mean, we're talking just like a quick, like a piece of paper, kind of drift off a little bit, that's usually just maybe some flex and stuff in the servos. But we shouldn't see any big drops, okay? So let's look. Boom. Perfect, okay? And let's go all the way down. When you go down, you want to kind of put just a little bit of pressure on it so it doesn't stick. And that's perfect. I get absolutely zero drifting or any servo delay. So guys, I'm telling you, a perfectly level swash is going to be the heart of this machine. Like I say with every fly barless system, if you can achieve this, you're going to achieve the best and most maximum results of this system. So a lot of people say this is hard to do, guys. It's that easy. Took me a few seconds to do, minus all the talking that I'm doing, and I got a perfect setup. So jump back over here real quick to the computer. I'm going to then drop this back down for safety, because now I know that it's level, so I'm going to bring her back to about 50. That way I just don't interact with my main hub or anything when I install the rotor back on. Now this next part, you'll notice we've got two options, our rudder endpoints and our cyclic tuning, if you will. This will basically be, you know, the amount of servo travel and stuff we want, right? So you'll notice though I can't move anything unless I activate them. Now the system only lets you do one at a time. So let's say we go cyclic ring, boom. It's kind of cool, guys, because it tells you a approximate amount of degree as well, right? So if we want to shoot for 8, boom, you know, we're 8 right there, right? So of course I'd want to have on a pitch gauge for this, but realistically what I would do, since the system has us set up for a 6 degree, this is more or less our travel range, travel limits. So all you really want to do, guys, and we're going to come back to this one once we set up our pitch range, of course, because if we're at a plus 12 pitch, we then can give full collective and full cyclic and adjust this to eliminate any binding, right? So for now, again, just for safety, I'm going to leave it, you know, leave it about 90 or so, just for the heck of it. And then you got to click off. Boom. Same with rudder endpoints. I haven't gotten to doing that yet, but you would hold left rudder, set your limit, right rudder, set your limit. For now, I've just got them set to a really low amount because I'm just focusing on the Swashplate. So I'll uncheck that. Let's move next. And that's it, guys. So that is going to be the initial video series right here. This will be for the Swashplate setup. Very, very important here. We've passed the wizard. Helicopters should be ready to fly. Again, I haven't done the main rotor or tail yet. But it does recommend setting rotor gain to 50%. I set mine to 55 because, like we talked about earlier, I usually find that their recommendations are a little soft. And then let's click the finish button real quick because there's one more thing that we need to check. Okay, save successfully. Boom, brings us right back to the menu. Now you could go through all these if you wanted, make your adjustments here and there and play around. There is one thing that I wanted to look at with you guys that I found out with Subtrim. When I bound up my radio, by default it put my throttle channel on channel 6, which channel 6 is also the pitch, and I was getting a very harsh shaking movement every time I'd throttle up, and I couldn't figure out how to fix it. After you've completed everything, guys, go right into here to where you see channels, right under the receiver tab. This gives you a map and ability to remap your servos and your features here as far as the channels go. I'm sorry, not your servos, your channels from your radio. But you'll notice my pitch is channel 6, right? It had my throttle on channel 6 also, and when it was doing that, I would throttle up, and all of my servos would shake aggressively, and I couldn't figure it out. So I came in here, and what I actually did is I clicked on unassign for my throttle, but since channel 1 was not being used, it defaulted it, and then I later learned that the throttle output signal comes from channel 1, and it fixed my problem. So for Subtrim users or anybody else experience an issue where you apply throttle and your servos all shake, try this. It should alleviate that issue, okay? One other thing I will address with you as well. When you get into that servo setup that we talked about where you're reversing, if no matter what, you can only get it to a point where the, you know, let's say the collective is working and elevator's working and aileron's working, but you can't get the elevator in the right direction, or you can't get the aileron in the right direction, no matter what. You got two options, guys. You can either, you know, again, keep these checked however needed or uncheck them, but you can either swap your servo pins on the flybarless system, so swap servo 1 with servo 3, and that should fix the problem. Or, again, you can come in here to your channels and just swap here, right? Put this one as channel 3 and put your pitch as a different channel. You know, if you need to, just know that there's different options, because I did run into that to where no matter what, I couldn't get my aileron to function properly. It was always reversed. And I had to actually swap my two servos physically. I unplugged them and swapped them, and then came back in and was able to check servo 1 and 3, and it fixed everything. So hopefully that's not too confusing, guys. Other than that, everything else should be good to go. The last thing I want to do is I want to make sure we check the gyro correction direction. That's going to be a big thing. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to power down the system. Let's do a quick power cycle on it. So power down. Power that off. and then it's going to tell you that you've lost connection. We'll just hit exit, and then if you guys want to jump over to the machine here, let's do a little bit of a zoom out because we're going to need some space here on the table. Now I'm going to go ahead at this time, just for the sake of doing this test with you guys, I'm going to unplug the cable for the programming, and then I'm going to power back up here. What we want to do is we want to make sure that the correction direction for our swash and our tail, for all intents and purposes, is correct. Okay, so let me power back up here. Okay, let it do its little song and dance. Get our jumps. Okay, now let's bench test real quick that everything we just did saved. Okay, so I'm just going to move my controls. Collective's good. Swash remains level. Forward elevator, backwards elevator, right aileron, left aileron. My tail doesn't have too much movement in it, but left stick I get right travel, right stick I get left travel. Boom. All is good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift up the heli, and we're going to check the correction direction on the swash. Now, if you guys are familiar with fly barless systems, you of course know exactly what we're looking for. If this is your first time, basically your swash plate should remain level at all times. Easiest way to remember it is if you tilt forward, the swash plate should tilt backwards. It should be opposite. If you tilt backwards, swash plate should tilt forwards. If you tilt right, it should tilt left, left, right. Okay? So here's a good way to look at it. Let's see if we can get this up here in the camera. Okay. So if I tilt the heli backwards, the swash should move forward. Ready? And it does. If I move forward, it moves backwards. So really what it's trying to do is it's remaining on a level, what do you want to call, horizon, you know, like an even plane, if you will. Okay? So forward goes backwards, backwards it goes forward. Basically, it's wrong if I move it forward and the swash plate moves forward, because that would just roll your machine right over, right? And then also, you can turn the machine and test it this way. Okay, that's all right. Now, of course, the tail is the same thing. You know, when you're testing the tail, of course, I haven't done my tail yet, but when I give my left rudder and it sticks over to the right, technically I'm flying the nose, right? So if I just turn the helicopter, I should see that moving in the opposite direction, and it does. So I know that my gyro corrections are right. I know my swash plate is indeed set up correctly. So at this point, guys, that's going to be it for this particular video. This will be the first setup wizard and the swash plate setup, correction direction, subtrimming, you know, leveling. We've got our foundation ready to go to make this machine fly like a beast. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to install the main rotor, and we'll come back on the next video and we'll complete the rest of the setup. We will do the tail, and by that time, guys, we should be ready for the maiden flight. As always, thank you so very much for watching, my friends. Remember, if Freddy can fly, so can you.